there's a new face here, which people may have noticed, but Robert Graff is joining the core team effective as of today. So I just want to welcome him, and I'll hand it over to him if you want to kind of introduce yourself and just talk a little bit about what you're doing.
Yeah, as Zach said, my name's Robert Graff. Super excited to be joining the core team. I'm a big fan of Ash, and I've been using it every day for about 14 months now. And I think I've been pretty active in Discord and submitting PRs when I can. I use it for my startup. So I'm currently involved in a startup called KickPlan. We are developing a SaaS billing infrastructure platform, and it has a lot of parts to it, and is a pretty ambitious project. The one of the main parts is called the management plane, which is you could think of as like a super configuration tool to build the rules for your SaaS company. It has tons of CRUD. And because I needed to crank out that CRUD as quickly as possible, I adopted Ash. And I also came from a Rails background. I've been working in Rails for a long time, and I felt that the transition from Rails to Ash was really nice and smooth because a lot of the things I enjoyed about Active Record and Active Support I could actually find by using Ash. So even though I liked Elixir, I was kind of missing a few things that were in the Ruby and Rails community. And that's me.
Awesome. Thank you. Thank you. So, Barnabas, I'll give you a chance to introduce yourself for those that don't know you. Maybe talk a little bit about what you're working on as well.
Yeah, so I'm Barnabas, as Zach said, and I've been on the core team for about half a year now. We've been using Ash for our backend, or at work. I'm working on a back office application for travel agency, and also the backend for the app for our end users, where they can book hotels, manage their travel documents, and so on. And yeah, last thing I did was expose ILike and like filters from the data layer on the graphical API. So that's gonna be in main tomorrow, I guess. And now that I'm done with that, I'm going back to working on subscription support in Ash GraphQL.
Awesome. Thank you. Really excited about the subscription stuff. Robert, maybe you could mention some of the Ash Paper Trail stuff that you had worked on. I think that's pretty relevant, and it's brought that extension to a very cool and interesting place.
I've done a lot of work on Ash Paper Trail because we needed to have audit logs for the various objects in our data model. Not so much like a event source. We really just needed a feed of here's what happened to this data and why the configuration is the way that it is. So we're not playing that back. So I worked a lot on Ash Paper Trail, specifically making it work with embedded objects or embedded resources and a lot of different edge cases, and doing full changes so you could see what the value was before and after a particular user edited it. And I don't have this functionality in our app right now, but I've laid the groundwork for doing kind of undos. So if somebody managing a SaaS company makes a configuration change and somebody wants to roll that back, but maybe three other changes have happened since then, we're kind of getting to the point where somebody could undo one change that happened in a line of changes. Um, and all that's being powered by Ash Paper Trail, which is probably the thing that I've worked the most on in the Ash community.
Awesome. Thank you both for those awesome introductions. Okay. So the next announcement we have is about Atomic updates or Atomic's bulk updates and bulk creates, which is that those are effectively feature complete. We've got main. This is probably the longest we've gone without having a release to Hex in ages. But we have main of Ash and Ash Postgres supporting bulk updates and bulk destroys, which is essentially being able to combine a read action and an update action, or a read action and a destroy action, and get an optimized like single query destroy where, or sorry, delete where or update where, that kind of thing. We haven't really documented these features aside from like the sort of auto-generated documentation of functions and options and things like that, because documenting these is going to be part of the big documentation overhaul that we're going to do very soon. And that dovetails into our next announcement, which is that we are on track for 3.0 to release in mid to late March, is what we're currently expecting. 3.0 is going to come with a sort of a fresh look at the documentation. It's not necessarily going to be a brand new like visual approach, but the idea is we have a lot more context on what users are looking for when they come to Ash. We have more context on what they need. And we know, for example, that the biggest thing we're missing is examples, practical examples, real life use cases, cookbook style documentation, and a sort of on-ramp where you can sort of, follow from, okay, I've done this getting started guide. What's something else that I could learn? I can follow this trail a little bit, instead of what we have right now, which is just tons of long form documentation and all of these things that are sort of scattered around, and it's up to you to hunt down the bit that you need. Ash is big. We're always going to have that problem to some degree. Like there's no perfect way to do this sort of documentation, and it's a relatively complex subject matter, right? But our aim is to really take a fresh look at all of that, and gear it more towards example centric documentation, and sort of revamp it for the beginner on ramp. That actually, I would say, concludes the announcements that we have. We're trying to calibrate kind of what these meetings should be like. And so to start, we're going to focus on questions from the community, which as of right now, there's no real guidelines or restrictions. You can ask us technical questions, or you can ask us, community oriented questions. It really doesn't matter. But the rest of the time here is basically just going to be about what other people want to know about. So we're going to wait and see what people say. You can ask questions in the YouTube chat, or if you're in the Discord server, you could, actually just ask them in the Discord chat, because then we'll have it here visible. So yeah, I'll leave it open to the community. What questions do you guys have? Don't be shy. One thing also to note is chat is pretty delayed from our stream, and our stream is delayed for us. So we might ask for questions and not get them for like a minute or even two, depending on, the time it takes for people to think about them and that sort of thing. Oh, hey, Dorgan. It's funny, I only know you by your username, but I know you quite well. Good to have you on the stream. All right, somebody's got to have something. There's like 10 people here. I believe in you.
So, what's your favorite feature about your new Apple Vision Pro?
Let's talk about Apple Vision Pro.
Honestly, I've been coding in it. I like I do a half immersion, so the front half is like a 3D Vista, and I code, and I've got like a TV show or something playing kind of downwards, not my lap, but down that way, and then I've got all my apps open up to the sides and stuff. It's still honestly, it's pretty janky. It feels more like a beta than a product release, just because there's so many little bugs with the apps and all that stuff. But it's a lot of fun. So I've been working it. I've been doing 4 to 5 hours, in it a day, pretty much. and it works. It's pretty exciting. And I mean, when you watch a movie on this thing is something else. Like when you watch like there's like this mega mode you can put the Apple TV app on where it like displaying like literally the size of mountains, and it's just something else.
Yeah, but you can't screenshot it, right?
Correct. You cannot screenshot it because of DRM. That's how they get you. All right, I think maybe some people have come on and dropped off, so I'm just gonna remind we're actually waiting for our first question right now. So we're just kind of shooting the breeze until we get a question. This meeting is primarily focused on questions from the community. So we're just gonna wait.
I have a question or a topic, so I'll just
Yeah.
improvise here a little bit. So post 3.0, the emphasis is going to be on documentation and you said cookbooks and on-ramps. Do you have envisioned a structure of how that will work in terms of are we going to start with an end vision and work there, or is it going to be a little bit more organic as people have questions that will tackle different topics? How do you think of the post 3.0 documentation project playing out?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So the framework that we roughly attempted to follow and will continue to follow going forward is a documentation framework called Diataxis, which describes like the sort of 4 axes of documentation. And ultimately, let me sort of pull it up here so I use the right word. If I can find it, the link to the website. Here we go. So it's the idea that you have tutorials, how-to guides, explanation, and reference. And what we've done quite well is reference. We have tons of reference documentation where you can go figure out when you are using X thing, what might happen. It's not necessarily always easy to find, but I would say we've really focused on reference. And then we have some tutorials, and those tutorials are very sort of beginner friendly tutorials of like how to get started. And then after that, it's like, well, if find out what you want to do and figure it out. And we also have how-to guides that are sort of like topics, but ultimately what needs to happen is we need to flesh out tutorials and how-to guides the most. And the thing is that those tutorials need to be they need to be like, given that you have some understanding of Ash, you're trying to do the X kind of thing. And because that is going to teach you not only, even if you don't need exactly that example, like a good example is like, okay, how do I implement archival, right? Like I want to soft delete things. And we need to show you like, okay, here's an example of how you might do that. Here, if you use Ash archival, you might do it this way. Or, so basically the plan for how to actually start the whole process is going to be going through Elixir forum and Discord forum and finding, because we have these examples out there. We've been supporting people with these examples for ages. So we're going to find common questions and we're going to try to factor those into higher quality examples. And the idea there is that like certain kinds of people and beginners are going to be able to flip through practical examples of how to do non-trivial things in Ash. And that's what you don't have right now. You have a tutorial to get started, and then there's almost no examples of how to do like more interesting and non-trivial things. So that's the plan.
All right. We have a question about types.
Yes. All right. So thanks for the question. It's not too early for this question because I think it actually is. It's in the back of my mind. It's something that I've been thinking about a lot, and we considered many times supporting like type specs, for example, but ultimately the risk, or not risk, but the reward to effort ratio is not good enough there. I know, these things aren't set in stone, but I spoke to Jose and he said that like the meta programming around types is something that we're going to be able to do. which of course I think of course you would. If for it to work with Elixir, we'd have to be able to do this. But what this ought to mean, and this is my plan, is that as soon as there are actual like userland type features for static typing, we are going to roll those out as features for Ash, like the ability for Ash types to have a callback that declares like what the type signature of their input casting is, and of their of a properly casted value and all that sort of thing. And then we're going to weave those into various places automatically for you. The big one there is going to be the code interface. The code interface is going to be statically typed, even though it's generated, and I think that's going to be extremely powerful, because you're basically going to have statically typed calling all of your actions. And because like all of the core types will already get those implementations, we'll ship that automatically, you're going to get a ton of type safety kind of for free. So it's a great question, and I think it's going to be a big focus for me as soon as it's available. We have another one. So notifications. This is a great question, and the best way to think about this is, so notifications happen outside of a transaction, and generally speaking, they are how you achieve at most once type message delivery, or like action invocation or something like that, right? So by at most once, I mean, like, let's say you have a user signs up and you want to send them a welcome email. You don't want sending a welcome email to be like part of the transactional creation of a user. Like if sending the welcome email fails, maybe you want to try again. That's kind of its own thing, but let's just assume in a really simple design, you want to send the email, and if it doesn't send, it's like, okay, they didn't get their welcome email. It's not the end of the world. The purpose of notifications is to implement that kind of thing. And for some context about why they work the way that they work, a really common bug that you'll see people implement in Phoenix applications is they'll have context functions. The context function will submit the context function will do some mutation, and then it will emit a pub sub event. And then somebody else will write, or you will, forgetting that that's how that works, will write another context function that starts a transaction and calls this other context function that sends out a pub sub event. Then the live view in question will get a pub sub event, and it will try to look up the thing that, you say, hey, we just created a tweet or whatever, but it's not actually created yet because the original transaction has not committed. So the idea is when you want to stitch up a whole bunch of, or not necessarily a whole bunch, but you want to make sure that this thing goes out once the transaction is committed and it's fully complete. That's what notifications are for. And the best example of that is pub sub notifications for like views, like things that are kind of ephemeral, maybe not super critical, or are allowed to fail. And pub sub things of like showing pop-up notifications or like re-rendering a page when a new post is created, that's allowed to fail. And it's the counter example to that is using an after action hook on a resource. Like that is how you add something to say, no, this needs to happen in the transaction, and if it fails, the action needs to fail and roll back as well. So that's the point of the notification system. Okay. And of course, also, by the way, if anybody else would like to jump in and add some context or anything like that, feel free to interrupt me, or either of you guys.
Yeah, we haven't been using notifications so far. We mostly add O-band jobs in after action hooks for most of the stuff, but it's also most of the stuff we really need to be sure that it's getting done, and also to retry stuff. So yeah, that's where we are at.
Yep, totally. Yeah, I think, okay, Leandro, your question, I mean, ultimately, the best thing, I would say a lot of times there's more information in the docs than you realize. It can be difficult to find exactly what you're looking for. So with the exception of, or in advance of us actually revamping the documentation, there's, not much that's going to happen on that front aside from, I would say, like, there is a lot more information there than it would seem. You just kind of have to dig into the DSL documentation, which contains, like, you can kind of, the DSL documentation can often explain a lot more than you might realize. Like, if you go in the DSL docs, you can see all of the options that are available for an attribute. So if you're thinking, how do I make an attribute do X? Like, poke around the DSL docs for attribute related things or action related things, and you might find what you're looking for. And of course that's not a seamless experience, but it's kind of the best that we have at the moment.
Yeah.
The DSL docs aren't the topmost document on Hex docs, so I tend to bookmark that and then just go right to it, because I agree with you, Zach. Like, starting with the DSL doc, that is, once you're past the introduction, you've got some basic understanding. That's the thing that you need to look at regularly. Like, even for me, when I'm doing something, I work in Ash almost all day, I still refer back to the DSL docs to refresh my memory as to what the various options are. And it's not always that fast to find on Hex docs. I just have it bookmarked.
Yeah, I mean, it's the same for me, and I use the backslash key a lot to just search. It's the shortcut for the search, and also G to swap between packages, because you can just hit G and then type Ash GraphQL and then go to the GraphQL docs and then hit G again, type in Ash and jump back to the Ash, the main docs. Yeah, that's how I
Yeah.
do it most times.
Yeah, that's also a good point, which is the community in general, and I'm doing some of the work that's required for this, this week. But we're working on multi-package search supported in Hex itself, or not necessarily in Hex, but like, for all Hex packages. But until then, you do have to jump around packages. Now, if you go to Ash HQ, our website, ash-hq.org, there is a multi-package search. It's not amazing, but it can help you find things if you're really not sure where some particular thing comes from. It can help you find things, and it will search across all of our published packages. So that's another potential way to find what you're looking for. And it will link you to Hex as well, like with the exception of the guides, that it'll link you to the site itself. But it can be a very useful resource for docs.
Like just the comment on YouTube, LLMs are in general not that good at Elixir yet, so it's a bit of a problem.
Yeah, they're not very good at Elixir, and they're even worse at Ash, in my experience.
Yeah. We have a question on Discord.
Oh, okay.
About, like, it's something that you mentioned before, that there haven't been like a release in a long time, like not a long time, but longer than usual. And
so
I think it's a couple of features that are coming in, and
no, you're right. But we did some pretty major refactors, and there's a sort of small group of users that are very gracious about doing tests against main and helping out with that, and they spotted a fair few issues actually with some of those refactors. And so ultimately the reason there hasn't been a release is just because we've done large changes and have only just now got it to the point where it's stable and everybody's tests are passing and things are green. So I would say to expect a release soon, maybe tomorrow, but otherwise next week. And with that release, there are some things are like massive performance improvements. In fact, like we've seen like 10, 20x performance on certain kinds of calculation, like requests that include calculations. We've seen, even just 2, 3, 4x on different operations. So like, it's going to be a very good release, and it's also going to be probably the last release, not major release, but the last sort of release that isn't a bug fix before 3.0. So as soon as this next release goes out, we're going to cut a branch and we're going to start working on 3.0, putting those breaking changes into a branch. So, and the plan there also is anybody who wants to incrementally adopt 3.0, we're going to merge one breaking change at a time and include the guide on how to adopt that new, because there are some breaking changes, but there will be a guide on how to adopt that one particular new breaking change. And so it will be possible for people to sort of follow along and upgrade to 3.0 incrementally in that way. It's not necessarily like the plan for 3.0, by the way, is my target, I mean, is for a relatively skilled Ash developer to be able to upgrade like a large application in less than a day. So we'll see if we meet that target, but that is the goal, because I don't want this like, you know, behemoth of an upgrade like you get sometimes. I've like literally somebody told me that they were upgrading from Vue 2 to Vue 3, and it took them like 6 months of like concerted team effort. So that's not the kind of thing that we're looking for at all. Should be hopefully painless.
Zach, what are some of those breaking changes that the community can expect?
Great question. So I don't have the list pulled up. Actually, maybe I will just look at the we have actually in the GitHub organization, there is a there's projects, and there is one called Ash 3.0 and one called Ash Framework Roadmap. We're not religious about updating these things, excuse me, but they are a reasonably good view as to what we're sort of working on and what's coming up. And Ash 3.0 contains things that we've tagged as, you know, have to wait for 3.0 for a breaking change. The big ones that we have are, yes, anonymous function calculations. If you have a calculation that takes an anonymous function, right now it takes a single record and returns a single result. That's going to be changed. In the future, it's going to be the same function signature as a module backed calculation. So it will take a list of records and return a list of results. And we also have, yes, ash.notSelected. So if you right now, when you apply a select statement to a query, what you don't select comes back nil. However, we're trying to make things a lot more explicit and developer friendly. And the way that this is going to work is if you don't select a value, it will be filled in with ash.notSelected. And so you can, if you try to like look at that value, you're going to see like you didn't ask for that value, and that's why it's not here. That way you can avoid bugs like if is nil user.firstname, not realizing that the data source you got that from didn't select that value. So that I think will be a good protection, but it is a breaking change. Process dictionary features will go away. So right now you can use ash.setActor and that sort of thing to store the actor in the process dictionary. We're going to just remove that. We may add like an adapter of some kind so that people who want to use it can, but it's not something that I want to officially support. And there are weird, like anybody who's using that, there are weird things that will pop up. If you keep using it, you will find yourself confronted with an issue at some point. I promise.
We're using it in our app, and I regret adopting it. I did remember from ElixirConf, Chris McCord announced a new feature in Phoenix that was going to allow for kind of a global type context. And I'm forgetting the name that they called it.
They called it Scope or something, I think, at myapp.scope. And I actually misunderstood that and got very excited about it until I realized that is what they're actually talking about is just a change to the generators. Or like it's basically the idea that there's a thing called Scope that you pass around everywhere, and like it's not like a magic global context function or global context that automatically goes to children. You still have to pass it around everywhere. It's just kind of a change to the pattern in Phoenix.
Okay.
But that will probably be where you'd keep that information, if you're following those patterns. Okay, this is a breaking change that's coming, and it's going to be weird. Probably this is probably one of the more complicated ones for people to update. But right now, when you add hooks to an action, if you add like after action hooks or before action hooks, the way it works is they actually execute in the opposite order that you add them. And the idea is like if I have a hook that says change set dot after action, I'm saying right after the action, right? And then I have another hook after it that says change set dot after action. I'm saying right after the action. So you reorder the changes. The one that goes last attaches its hook first. And so if you have two changes listed in a resource, 1, 2, they both add an after action hook, they will go in reverse order. And that does actually have there is a good reason for why that's implemented that way when you're building hooks programmatically. But most of the time, Ash users are building hooks more declaratively. So they have change 1, change 2, change 3, and they all have a before after, might have a before action hook and then an after action hook or whatever, right? And the way that it feels like they should go is in order. Like the before action hook of the first change should happen, then the before action of the second change should happen, and then the before action of the third change should happen, and then like they'll be unwrapped sort of in the same order. And so that will be the new default behavior. So if you have actions that have multiple after action hooks that happen on them, you may need to make some adjustments here to account for those hook changes, which is like if you were relying on the order of after action hooks, for example, or before action hooks to go in a particular order because maybe you're passing context or you have an order of events, then you're going to need to adjust those actions. I am considering adding a global configuration toggle to turn this off that we would support temporarily, so that if there are people that need to make this change, or like a way to maybe disable that for specific actions. I haven't really decided quite yet, but because it is kind of one of those, it's gonna be hard to upgrade. That'll be one of the harder things to upgrade. We're gonna error on unknown keys being added to if you call an action with an attribute or with like a key in the map that is not an argument or an attribute that is actually accepted by that action. Right now we just ignore it. And that can lead to like subtle bugs. People think they're passing in some value, but the action's actually just ignoring it. And that's, again, not, we're trying to be more explicit. And so you will get an error. You're going to get back an error like unsupported input or something. We haven't, named TBD. And then finally, the biggest one, or I would say maybe this one or the action hook order could be the biggest one, is right now in a resource, by default, when you write an action, it has an accept, which is what attributes it accepts. And that is all public writable attributes. And in 3.0, that default accept will be nothing. It will be an empty list. And it will be up to you. So the idea is we would rather you be more explicit rather than, because what can happen is somebody can add an attribute and not realize that it's been included in the writable list of attributes on some action and they didn't really intend that. It's a very easy way to accidentally make something writable that you didn't intend to make writable. So there's a quick fix for this to get the old behavior that you had. There's an option that exists today called default accept. You pop that up in the top of your actions block, or well, anywhere in there, we've added something where you can just say default accept and then an asterisk, like the Atom asterisk, that's going to give you the old behavior of all public writable attributes. So what you could then do is you could upgrade by just going to every resource, putting that default accept in, and you'll have the same old behavior, but at least it's been made explicit that you're opting into that, and you could maybe incrementally opt out of it for the, if you prefer the new behavior. But we didn't want that to be the default going forward. Those are the breaking changes that we have planned for 3.0 currently.
Mm-hmm. There was a question about GraphQL subscription on the Discord, and it was about if there were any technical hurdles or if it was just time why it's not yet in Ash GraphQL. And I guess it's mostly time. You can already do subscription with Ash Graphql. It's just a little bit of manual work. You have to add it to the schema yourself, and then there's a function that helps you actually resolve the subscription. And I've been working on and off on it for the last half year. And actually, like at the beginning of this year, I had my head wrapped around most of the stuff, so I'm at a pretty good point, I think. But last 2 weeks, I was mostly doing work on getting our application working on main again. And now that that's done, I'm going back to working on it. But I'm only doing it in my free time, so the progress is a bit slow. But my goal is to have something working until ElixirConf View at least.
I definitely think that's also something that's really important to keep in mind, which is of all of us, like I'm the only one that's being explicitly paid to work on Ash. And I think we all have vested interest in it, but as a community, you know, like I don't want any other contributors to ever, or core team members even, to ever feel like they have like there's any sort of deadlines or anything like that. It's just not really how it works. And ultimately, like, I'm very grateful for all the work that everybody's done, core team and otherwise. We're up to, I think, 120 total contributors, and everybody, actually, that's not true. I'm not the only one who's paid to work. James Harton also works at Alembic, and he works on Ash as well on company time. But the point is, we should be very grateful for contributors and other core team members for donating. Essentially what they're doing is donating their personal time to Ash to help make it better for them, but also to help make it better for the rest of the community. So thank you all very much for that.
Okay. Yeah, I also have to thank my company because I get to work on Ash on company time from time to time if it's something that we have to get working for work. So yeah, that's pretty cool.
Working in Ash is kind of my job as well.
Yeah. You get my point though, that you're very, you know, you're choosing
to, different. Yeah. So,
but I'm grateful for sure. And of course, I mean, the point is for this to be something useful that people can use to actually make money. Like, so
yeah,
it does make sense.
Getting a lot out of it at our company, so
that's good. Very good. I think Robert, you had something you were going to bring up earlier. I think maybe did you have a question or something like that?
I can't remember. One thing that I know was talked about was making the declaration when you do use Ash resource to declare the API. Is that going to impact how we declare the registry or the resources in an API?
That's a great question. And no. So what that is a breaking change that is not in my list. I'm going to put this on my reminders because I need to add this to, I need to move that issue to the 3.0. Give me 1 second. API option tag to 3.0. Okay, sorry. Yes, so that is the other, it's not technically a breaking change. Actually, it is technically a breaking change.
Because it'll be required.
So it won't be required to specify API when you say use ash.resource. However, when you construct a change set with changeset.4create, changeset.4action, it will be required that we know the API in question. So you could go to all of the places where you construct change sets and give me the right API, which you don't want to do. Because like 99.9% of users have a resources exists only in one API ever. And so if you specify API in the resource, that will pull it from the resource instead of from an option. So it is a breaking change. It's like 99 out of 100 Ash users, probably every Ash user will just specify the API option when saying use ash.resource. But that's the only thing that'll change. The other thing is that it will validate that it will yell at you if it's not in that API specifically. is
So
a
you
is
have
a
to specify both on the resource and the API then.
yeah,
Okay.
exactly. It'll be going both ways. And this is worth talking. These are things that if I have time, we'll go into 3.0, and if not, they'll be like 3.1. We've talked about in the past even removing APIs, and they don't do that much right now. Actually, they're like a list of resources, and they have some configuration. They have security related configuration. Oh, security related configuration. This also matters. A
Yeah.
breaking change for
Back and
3.0.
forth, right?
Yeah. Right now, authorize in 3.0. So authorization happens when you pass an actor or when you say authorize true. And that's like implicit authorization, which is it doesn't happen automatically. And that usually throws people for a loop. And we haven't changed it because it would be a breaking change. But in 3.0, in 3.0, we will, if there's an authorizer on the resource, it will be run by default automatically. And that's called authorized by default. That's a configuration option that you can place in your API. If you're not using policies or authorizers or whatever, this doesn't affect you. If you are using policies or authorizers, you probably already know about this configuration option because you were probably surprised at one point when you thought something would get forbidden, but it wasn't. And you found that configuration and you changed it. But that would be the new default is authorized by default. I feel like I just forgot about something that we were.
Yeah, not sure.
Okay.
But there's another question in the Discord about the APIs. If it still makes sense to split up the resource into multiple APIs for compile time speed. I think probably, right?
I don't know if it is important for compile speed now. I would have to check. I know in the past it was, but I think it might not matter. So I wouldn't suggest I wouldn't suggest doing it for compile time speed. I'd have to verify really to say, but I think it should be fine either way.
I mean, we're doing it like one API per context.
Yeah,
per
exactly.
domain.
We have discussed and may implement. I haven't brought it up, but we may implement the change of the term ash.api to ash.interface. That may happen. TBD. If I have time, if not, maybe that'll be a 4.0 thing. But people hate that name. I hate that name now because other people do. I thought it was great originally, but people get confused about it because it's a very overloaded term. I mean, interface is overloaded as well, but just less overloaded. It's not a web thing, you know. Anyway, I'm glad you brought that.
Have you
go ahead.
Have you considered calling it a context to kind of map with the Phoenix context, which I don't like that name and the way that Phoenix uses it, but there is some parity or parallels between the two.
We have considered it. Ultimately, the problem with that is that we have the reason we opted not to do that is because we have a bunch of arguments that get passed to your functions in various places called context, and that context is like a map of like arbitrary data, and the worry is that there's just going to be a bunch of confusion about like there's that third argument called context. Is it the context that is being called in? And it's like, no, it's such a nebulous word that we're worried there'll be conflicts like that. But that was a strong contender in the discussion. So I'm glad you actually brought up APIs because that is the other thing I was going to talk about, which is what will be happening as a feature, maybe by 3.0, but probably afterwards, is we are going to support a code interface on the API. So that will let you map resource actions from each given resource to functions that you call from the API. And I would say that has like a 50% chance of happening. But one thing that is almost certainly going to happen is we're going to support policies on the API. So policies on the API will apply to every resource called through the API. And bypasses, for example, are a great use case for that. If you have like allow super admins to do anything they want or whatever, you can put that bypass in the API and it will automatically apply to all calls through it. And the way you can basically, it's like that API, that policy block in the API is just at the very top of every policy block of every resource. That's how it's going to be treated.
That's great.
So we want to make
Most of
APIs more
our
useful. Yeah.
yeah, most of our policies come from the API. So every resource in an API has the same policies, with maybe one or two exceptions, but that's kind of how we've determined what resources are in which API. It's based on the policies.
Yeah.
So
No,
that'll map nicely.
that makes sense. And you'll have like a resource is new check that you can put in when you're, because like normally you always have the resource when you're writing your policies in the resource, but that way if you have like one exception, for example, you can say like, you know, you can just check what resource it is in the policy on the API. So it's like all resources except this one are allowed to super, you know, for super admins or something like that.
That's great.
It was already possible to pull in code interfaces into different module, right? Before,
Yes. Yes, it was.
but it had like some compile time, like it added a lot of compile time dependency, I think. Will this be better in the API?
Yes, the basic it will not be better than that. The reason that was bad is because you had to pick one or the other. The function names that were defined were always the same as as what it said, define whatever. And so you could define it in the resource or you could define it in some other module, and they would just use the names for define for. In this one, you'll see like define, and then you'll have like the function name, and then you'll have the action name on the resource. And so you can actually like remap the action names. So you could have like create post in the post thing that could have a code interface on it called create. And then you could have like API dot create post pointing at that action. So you get the ability to define it with different names. It's really the main thing there. Yeah, it's really being able to rename it.
One thing that I'm thinking about is like version numbers, and with the different libraries, what's the best way to figure out which version play well together and how that's going to be affected by 3.0?
It's a good question. There are I've thought about trying to do things that like other library ecosystems have done, where like you version everything together. But there are too many packages, and yeah, I think the way that you find out what's compatible, yeah, I just don't know if there's a good solution there that's anything other than like try to keep the latest versions compatible with the latest versions of Ash, you know. Um, I wonder if there's something that HexPM could do. Like you could go in and you could type in like,
I mean, if they do the multi-package documentation, whatever, you probably have to specify the versions, right? Because you like for the different packages that work together.
yeah, kind of. Well, no, you point like sibling packages. I don't know exactly how that's going to work yet, but I don't know if it'll contain versions. But what I'm thinking is like you have in Hex, it shows you like what other packages on Hex depend on you. So they have that information. So what you could potentially do is I want to talk to them about this because you could potentially click on Ash 3.0 and see like which of its dependents on that list are compatible with 3.0. And then or like have which of them like have a latest version or something that's compatible with 3.0 or something like that. That would be super useful and would work for every other. Yeah, I like that. I don't think I can do that before 3.0 happens, but that would probably be the way going forward that I would want this to work. I will talk to somebody about that when I get a chance. All right.
Do you have other questions right now?
I don't think so.
I don't think so either.
Okay. You guys have any questions or things you want to talk about or bring up?
I don't think so.
I mean, I have some questions about technical support that I could use right now.
I mean, I'll tell you what. Unless we get some other questions, we'll plan on quitting in like 10 minutes or so. So it'll be an hour long meeting.
Yeah.
So why don't you shoot? Go ahead. I mean, we don't have any other questions, so let's talk tech.
Yeah. Yeah, we're starting to do some work integrating with external APIs that are external resources. And
Oh,
and right now I'm not bringing them into Ash.
you
I
broke
know
up.
that I could Ash so that they have
Sorry, hold
policies
on.
applied to them.
So you said doing work with external resources. For some reason, your signal kind of broke up for me.
Oh, yeah, external APIs
Yeah.
basically being a data layer. So we're reading and writing to external APIs. And right now I don't have that. I'm not using Ash for those external APIs, but I could wrap the actions. I could create actions uh, and then have all the benefits of policies and relationships. Are there examples? Have people been doing that?
Well, we're doing that. We're like sometimes doing the calls in a before action and then putting the data into the resource that way, and then just use regular Ash actions from the outside. We
You
do
are?
that with
Okay.
with
Be interested
Stripe,
to see samples of that.
for example.
How do you
Yeah.
deal with those, reading from an external API sometimes being slow?
Yeah, we just live with it for now.
So like right now we're
Yeah.
using like async assign. Okay.
Okay, well
That's
we
interesting.
don't use live view. So it's just
You don't use live view. Okay.
the response is a little bit slow on the GraphQL API for those requests. But yeah.
Got
And
it.
then it's like we do it in some internal things, so we only do like in Oban jobs, and then yeah, it doesn't really matter there. It's fast enough.
Yeah,
Mm.
I would say also from Ash's perspective, it doesn't matter if an action takes a long time. Like it maybe matters if you're exposing that over an API or if you're trying to render some data in your live view from that. Then it matters that the Ash action is taking a long time. But like Ash would be happy to have an action running take 5 minutes, right? It doesn't really matter. And we do actually have it's been experimental forever, and it's probably going to be experimental for a very long time. But mostly just because I haven't had a chance to use it in the real world. Or I would say use it in sort of production. But we have a data layer called Ash JSON API wrapper that is designed to let you map a resource to a JSON API. And it has tools for pageant. I mean, I don't even know if I'd call it experimental. There are people using it, but it's just like, it's a big domain that I haven't put enough time in to really say, like, slap a sticker on it and say, like, give it a shot. But it supports like pagination, filtering. It supports remapping fields and like mapping to responses and things like that. So it also has some features for generating resources from an open API schema that will then call the API in question, which is pretty cool. So the idea is you can sort of generate a client library from it, or not even sort of a client library, but then you can then expose those resource functions in whatever way you wanted. So you could even like federate a bunch of JSON API or, that way, things like that. So big space that we haven't necessarily, nailed everything down in. But that would be worth checking out. It's not published on Hex. It's probably, if you haven't seen it yet, that's probably why.
Okay. I'll check that out.
There was another question about like dealing with the libraries. And I just read out loud. Is there a way to at least one fork about other libraries? For example, Ash authentication is no longer getting love, just an example, and Ash 3.0 is going rocket and will no longer work. There, like Ash on GitHub, Ash CI is pulling in like most of the big libraries and doing the tests from them, right? And checking if they still work together.
Yes. So that would probably be the best like heuristic. And the thing is, in CI, we clone every related project and run that project's tests against this version of Ash. And so you can see there basically like what that's the list of projects we run CI on is the list of projects that we like that Ash officially supports. And insofar as like we consider our own CI to have failed if those projects CIs have failed, like Ash Authentication, Ash Postgres, Ash GraphQL, that sort of thing. So that's probably the place to look. Okay. I think this is probably the right time to cut it. We got a lot of good questions in. It's been about an hour. I think we'll call it here, folks.
Awesome.
I want to thank Robert and Barnabas for hopping on and helping answer questions and just all your awesome work. And I want to thank Bash Framework users that showed up and asked questions. Really appreciate everybody's time, and we're going to try to do this once a month. Not everybody's always going to be here. It's going to be a kind of a rotating cast potentially, but the goal is to have one of these office hours once every month. So we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye bye.
Bye.